They didn't laugh in the Pentagon. They didn't laugh in Beijing. And they definitely didn't laugh in Moscow. When Donald Trump said, "We're going to take it, one way or another," the world thought it was another Trump moment. Another headline. Another joke. But behind closed doors, the tone was very different. What the media dismissed as a real estate fantasy has quietly evolved into one of the most aggressive geopolitical calculations of the modern era. Because Greenland is not a joke. And this was never about buying land. This is about power. Welcome to Econ Empires. Today, we strip away the noise, the memes, and the outrage to expose the cold economic logic behind America's most controversial move. Why would the United States even consider forcing control over the world's largest island? Why now? And why does Greenland matter more than most countries you see in the news every day? This is not about ice. This is about survival. When Trump first floated the idea of acquiring Greenland, late-night hosts laughed. Commentators mocked the idea of purchasing a sovereign territory in the 21st century. But Vladimir Putin didn't laugh. He called it predictable. Because American interest in Greenland is not impulsive. It is over 150 years old. To understand what's happening today, we have to dig into a history most people never learned. This story begins in the 1800s. In 1867, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. At the time, it was ridiculed. Seward's folly, they called it. A frozen wasteland. Today, Alaska is one of the most valuable strategic assets on the planet. Its oil, its military positioning, its proximity to Russia. That folly became one of the greatest investments in human history. But here's what few people know. William Seward didn't just want Alaska. In his internal reports, he identified Greenland as the next essential piece. Why? Because Greenland controls the Atlantic gateway. It is the lock on North America's northern door. The idea stalled. Not because it was wrong, but because the political courage wasn't there. But it never disappeared. In 1910, the United States explored a three-way territorial swap. Greenland, the Philippines, European land concessions. The deal failed. But one thing was now clear. Greenland had strategic value. Fast forward to 1946. World War II had ended. Europe was broken. America stood alone at the top. President Harry Truman made a move. He offered Denmark $100 million in gold for Greenland. Adjusted for today's economy, it was a massive offer. Denmark said no, but they gave up something far more important: control. In 1951, Denmark and the United States signed a defense treaty that transformed Greenland into a military shield. The U.S. built Thule Air Base, the northernmost American military installation on Earth. For decades, Thule was the early warning system between American cities and Soviet nuclear destruction. Greenland stopped being land. It became infrastructure. And now, that old arrangement is breaking. Why? Because the ice is melting, and power is moving north. The old deal, Denmark holds the flag, America holds the guns, no longer works. Three forces have changed everything: sovereignty, China, and rare earths. Let's start with Greenland itself. Greenland is not a country. It is an autonomous territory under Denmark. It is massive, 3 times the size of Texas, but only 56,000 people live there, primarily Inuit, with their own language, identity, and politics. In 2008, Greenland voted for greater autonomy. They control their resources, their courts, their police. But there is one fatal weakness: money. Every year, Denmark sends roughly $600 million to keep Greenland running. That single subsidy pays for schools, hospitals, and government. Without it, the system collapses. This is Denmark's leash, and Washington knows it. From the U.S. perspective, $600 million is nothing. It's less than half the cost of a single stealth bomber. The strategy being discussed is brutally simple: outbid Denmark. If the United States offers $2 billion annually, plus infrastructure investment, Greenland no longer needs Copenhagen. The loyalty shifts, and Denmark loses control, without a single shot fired. But why rush? Because China has already arrived. While Western media obsessed over Trump's rhetoric, China was executing something far more dangerous: silence. Beijing calls itself a near-Arctic state. Geographically absurd, economically deadly. In 2018, China officially integrated the Arctic into its Belt and Road Initiative, the Polar Silk Road. Then came the wake-up call. In 2016, a Chinese company attempted to buy an abandoned naval base in Greenland, a deep water port in America's backyard. Washington shut it down, but China adapted. In 2017, Greenland's leadership was invited to Beijing. Trade talks, seafood exports, and quietly, infrastructure loans. China proposed building 3 international airports, hundreds of millions in debt. If Greenland couldn't pay, China would own the infrastructure. The Pentagon panicked. The U.S. forced Denmark to co-finance the airports, just to block Beijing. But the message was clear. Denmark is too weak to compete with China's checkbook. And China doesn't need soldiers. Debt does the job. But the real prize lies under the ice. Rare earth elements, the backbone of modern civilization. Fighter jets, electric vehicles, missile systems, wind turbines. China controls up to 90% of global rare earth processing. If Beijing cuts exports, American industry freezes. Greenland changes that. One of the largest undeveloped rare earth reserves on Earth sits there, enough to supply global demand for decades. Add to that 17.5 billion barrels of oil, 148 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Total estimated value, up to $4 trillion. That's why this isn't diplomacy. It's acquisition. And then there are the shipping lanes. As the Arctic melts, new trade routes open. The Northwest Passage, the Northern Sea Route. These are the Suez Canals of the 21st century. They cut shipping distances by nearly 40%. Whoever controls Greenland controls the Eastern Gate. Russia knows this. Putin has militarized the Arctic at record speed. Missiles, bases, nuclear icebreakers. To Washington, Greenland is an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Lose it, and the Arctic becomes a battlefield. So how does this end? Not with an invasion, but with pressure. Economic seduction for Greenland. Geopolitical suffocation for Denmark. The U.S. opens a consulate in Nuuk. Talks directly to local leaders. Bypasses Copenhagen. Offer independence. Offer money. Offer American passports. For 56,000 people. The temptation is overwhelming. At the same time, the U.S. pressures Denmark to militarize Greenland, something Denmark cannot afford. Eventually, the math wins. And if all else fails, history provides the precedent. During World War II, the U.S. occupied Greenland to prevent German control. Today's justification would be different. Not invasion. Protection. The doctrine is simple. If you cannot defend your territory, you do not truly own it. The paperwork is already being prepared. Budgets, currency transitions, legal frameworks. This is not theory. This is preparation. In the end, buying Greenland was never a joke. It is the convergence of climate change, resource scarcity, and great power rivalry. In the 21st century, the Arctic is the new Mediterranean, and Greenland is Gibraltar. The takeover is already in motion. The only question left is how fast.